Welcome, everybody. This is such a fun topic. I don't think we ever envisioned having this discussion over a year ago that the dorm room would become a classroom, although you'll find out from our panelists that they were kind of thinking about this pre-COVID. And so I think that's pretty fascinating. They were actually looking ahead and not necessarily anticipating a pandemic, but anticipating how the residence halls could become more conducive to the learning environment and more connected to it. So I'm going to have each panelist introduce themselves. Oops, sorry about that. Again, I'm Teresa de Onis. I'm with Apogee in Austin, Texas. We are a managed service provider that focuses on providing network services to residence halls and campuses throughout the country. We are exclusively focused on higher ed. Higher ed is my passion. I was actually a marketing VP at the University of Texas at Austin for a while. And both my parents were PhDs who taught, and it is just a passion of mine. So I am loving working with all of our clients as they strive to deliver incredible student experiences across different types of schools and universities and colleges in the country. So I'm going to let my panelists introduce themselves, and Christopher, we'll start with you.
Hi there, my name is Chris Bruno. I work at Kennesaw State University in Kennesaw, Georgia, just north of Atlanta. I serve as the Director of Customer Service and Operations.
Great. Iyisha?
Hi, I'm Iyisha Hampton. I'm the Director of Housing and Residence Life at Auburn University at Montgomery. So glad to have you all here with us today.
Thanks, Iyisha. And John.
Good morning, all. I'm John Hughey. I'm the Assistant Director of Residence Life and Housing at the University of Mary Washington, located in Fredericksburg, Virginia, kind of halfway between Richmond and DC.
Great, thanks, John. And everybody attending today, again, thank you so much. We definitely want to make this as interactive as possible. So we're going to be monitoring the chat. If you have questions, we definitely will pause to answer them. And if you want to raise your hand and be on camera and speak, that's great too, because we've got a lot of great information to share. So today we're going to talk about a couple of things. One is this concept that blended learning is here to stay, that you can enhance the traditional educational experience in higher ed with online modalities. Nobody wants to see the pendulum swing too far, where online only becomes the method by which we educate everyone. So we do believe, though, that the online modalities are going to play a very, very big role. And we're going to talk to our panelists about what that means for housing officers and the residential life experience. We're also going to talk about how you can modernize and be ready for that, for this eventual, era in which blended learning is the norm, and where you're really focusing on having the optimal investments and letting go of things that aren't optimal. And how do you strike that balance, especially now when budgets are so constrained? And then we're going to ask our panelists for advice on actions that you can take now and some of their experiences and what they've learned throughout the pandemic. And I'm telling you, they've got some incredible ideas that they've been implementing and experiments that they've been running that I think you will really, really love to hear about. So that's the agenda for today. I just want to share one piece of statistics with you. The drop in enrollment that we've seen, is pretty incredible and unfortunate. Fall 2020, we saw a decline in enrollment overall across the country of about 4.4%. But there is evidence that institutions that had undergraduates enrolled exclusively in online programs prior to COVID experienced a lower drop in enrollment. One of our partners in California, ACU, they saw that their institutions that had online programs experienced a 2% drop in enrollment versus a 9% drop overall for the institutions that did not. And I'm sure you have seen, universities like ASU actually saw increases in enrollment because they had invested for so long in these online modalities and were known for that. And so students, flocked to those schools in some cases that had vast experience in that area. So this is really interesting because one of the other things that we're trying to really strive for in higher ed is more equity and equality and accessibility. And online modalities will definitely help with that as well. And so you start to bring the cost down a little bit. You start to open up higher ed to those who may not have otherwise been able to access it. And you make it more fair and equitable. And so the pandemic, in a way, has that silver lining of having, really woken us up to things that we knew were there. We knew these problems existed, but we'd been probably slow to take action on them. And so we at Apogee definitely believe that blended learning is here to stay, that the benefits really outweigh, especially when done right, when you invest in the instructional design techniques, in training faculty and all of those things. And obviously internet access is incredibly important for this, but that those benefits outweigh any potential swing we might see from the traditional learning environment. And our goal is to be good partners in helping you find that balance. Again, we don't want the pendulum to swing too far. And we absolutely believe in the residential life experience as a formative experience. It greatly enhances a person's overall outlook on life, their personality, the connections that you make, the friendships that you make. My roommate in college at the University of Texas at Austin at Jester Center, she's still my best friend. You just can't replace a lot of that. And so that balance of continuing to offer that incredible on-campus and both the on-campus traditional learning experience and the on-campus living experience. How do we move forward now? How do we get the best of both worlds? How do we get the best of that and the best of what online learning can do to create more accessibility and equality? All right, so we're going to dive in. And the first question I have for the panelists is what we want to explore why housing officers should care about blended learning. And I think I just gave a little bit of an intro, but I want to get each of our panelists' take on this and how their journey through the pandemic to today and what they foresee for the future. And we'll start with you, Iyisha. Your thoughts on the impact that this is going to have on your role and on your residence halls at Auburn.
Absolutely. So the pandemic has done so many things, but one is it really has provided us an opportunity to really think about resources in a different way. And so the thought of blended learning and the opportunity to bring the classroom into the residence halls is the hallmark of what it means to be in housing, right? And so the concept to really make that foundational as a part of what we offer and what the new college experience looks like has been paramount to us really trying to keep our residence halls filled, to reinvent how we market our housing opportunities. And so it's been a really great opportunity to enhance the experience and figure out, hey, this is actually what we wanted, but it just kind of sped up the process of ensuring that students and parents and our stakeholders understand what it means to be a residential student.
Wonderful. Chris, what's your take on this?
Yeah, the pandemic has definitely taught us a lot. We're learning every day still. And I think to your point in the opening, I think the blended learning is here to stay. Online classes at Kennesaw State is something that had been slowly on the rise in the years prior to this past year. And we had always kept an eye as to, what percentage of classes are online. And we believe very much in the services that we provide and the experience that we offer. And we love online classes because it, like you said, it gives access to students who might not have it otherwise. But it was a threat to us, you know, from an occupancy standpoint. We want to make sure that our buildings are full so that we can pay our bills and make sure that we have enough money to operate. So we've had to shift our marketing perspectives and also invest in our infrastructure. Our network years ago, and Natalie's on the call. She used to work at Kennesaw State, so she knows our challenges with the Wi-Fi network. We have two campuses, Marietta and Kennesaw, and the Marietta campus didn't have any sort of Wi-Fi network at all, and the Kennesaw had a miserable network. So we invested in the infrastructure 2 years ago and partnered with Apogee and provide a very strong, very stable connection to our students, because we felt like more and more students were going to be taking at least one hybrid class during their time at Kennesaw State, and we wanted to have that in place for them to be able to be successful academically. So it's been an interesting challenge for sure.
Wonderful. Thanks, Chris. John, and what's your take on this?
Sure. I'll echo a lot of what Iyisha and Chris said already about the challenges, what we've learned. I think that from our perspective, we were kind of in some ways uniquely suited when the pandemic hit, because we had already been making a change toward increasing our digital fluency in all aspects of our university. Our president had identified that as one of our key goals moving forward in a world where digital connection is more and more important by the day. So for our first year hall, we had already been renovating. We built in some spaces that were able to very easily transition once the pandemic hit into those classroom spaces, into those more like small group spaces where you can be socially distanced and still work on a project together. But we hadn't really planned that for our upperclassmen halls because it was a very first year centered focus. So what we learned from that is that we're going to have to focus a lot on the infrastructure there too, because all of our students are kind of in the same boat now with needing that blended learning environment.
Fantastic. Thank you, guys. I want to take a look at where you guys stand now. So can each of you walk us through, I don't want to go all the way back to spring because I think we'd all like to forget that. Let's start with fall and how you brought students back and any changes that you made over the summer to accommodate for fall, and then things that you learned in the fall that you're now implementing now in spring 2021. And John, you're still on the screen on my end, so I'll pick on you first.
All right. I think our biggest change was doing an all virtual orientation that kind of set the stage for the year. And that was a huge departure for our students. So kind of learning from that, the different ways that Zoom burnout occurs, because, you know, even in the spring, we hadn't necessarily seen that as much because everything was just kind of in chaos. But in the fall, we really started to see the Zoom burnout and trying to find ways to keep people engaged. So that really helped us begin our engagement strategy. I'd say, I mean, honestly, I wish we could have done it sooner, but it took probably the first half of the fall semester before we really started to make some inroads with our engagement. Students were just, they'd show up to things for a couple sessions and then it was just radio silence. So we did learn a lot about, you know, ways to connect with them in the small groups and still try to get the little bits of personal connection in there. And I think that's partly due to, you know, our students don't always see things in the shades of gray. So it was either in person or virtual. There's no in between. So kind of helping to teach our staff and ourselves to kind of find those inroads where you can find some of the in-person interaction and then build that into the greater online engagement was very useful.
Great. Thank you so much. Chris, how about you?
Yeah, when all this first started happening in March of last year, we got together and started talking about what fall is going to look like. And just like John, we had an all virtual orientation, which really did set the tone for what fall was going to look like for our students. And given that most of our first year class, they finished their high school career in a virtual environment, we wanted to prepare for what that was going to look like for them. And at move-in time, we did a contactless check-in process where we had students drive through one of our parking decks. We used QR codes to check them into the room in StarRes, which is what we use here. And then from there, we developed a series of virtual programming efforts. We licensed software that we needed to license and looked at ways to engage our students in that virtual environment, both in a small scale setting, just like John said, with our RAs hosting individual, virtual floor meetings, things like that, and then doing what we call owl chats, where they check in with their residents periodically in a virtual environment and just make sure that they're doing okay. Kennesaw, on August 5th, I remember the date very specifically, that's the date when they released the modality of classes. And that is the day that students found out that most of their classes were going to be online. Up to that point, it was still unknown if it was going to be in person or virtual. They made the call very late, and we started to see just waves of cancellations. I mean, we're talking hundreds of students canceling their housing agreements. So we were scrambling to start to backfill off of our wait list and try to get as full as we can for fall. Some lessons learned, students are hungry. They're hungry for any sort of interaction, and they want to interact with each other and other people face to face, just like we are. I can't wait to get back to a face-to-face meeting. I thought I would never say those words, but I can't wait for that time. And so we're carrying into spring a lot of virtual programming, but we're starting to see some little flashes of normal life where we're having some in-person events in our lounge space areas where we can socially distance, and then our green spaces on campus. So I think those are some of the lessons that we're taking into spring.
Fantastic. All right, Iyisha, you're up on this topic.
Yeah, so great information from John and Chris. I think we definitely were focused on connection as well. And then that started with our move-in process, definitely doing it in a safe way. But I pride myself on being the official grandma hugger for our department. And that's just the thing I love about move-in. And not only could I not hug grandmas, we strongly encouraged our students to leave grandma at home because she couldn't carry a TV. So there are just so many changes that changed the connection from the beginning. And so we were in a scramble to make sure that we were able to just make that connection happen in a different way. And so one thing that we did was we asked our students to connect with one another in a different way. We called it a family unit. So students that lived in a room together were now a family unit, and we asked them to rely on each other to enforce policy. We asked them to rely on each other to have events. So we bought a whole lot more Phase 10 cards and Uno cards and things like that, and said, have your family unit connect with one another on a way that maybe you haven't before, because that's the connection that we knew we could continue to have. And we had some great success with that.
I love that, Iyisha. And, a big part of just getting through the pandemic for all of us has been figuring out how to form those connections and how do you do that virtually. I do look forward to the day when, this conference is back in person and I get to meet all of you in person, and I can't wait for that. But I really commend you for doing all of, going that extra mile to make the students and the families feel safe. And I'm curious, Iyisha, in your case, how did those efforts affect your occupancy? Did they help? Did you have any melt happen because of the difficulties of dealing with the pandemic and dorm life and not being able to have it be what it's supposed to be? Fully?
Absolutely. So we had a dramatic melt. We were fortunate to have wait lists year after year. That was something that we had become accustomed to. And it was difficult in the fall semester as information continued to roll out about what that semester would look like. Students, fortunately for the university as a whole, decided that they did want to remain in class, but that the benefit of being on campus, it was more difficult for them to see it. So what we decided to do is to talk to our families and make sure that they knew that we supported whatever was best for their family, even if that didn't mean that they would be with us this year, because they continued as a student next year, as we were able to get a little bit more normalcy back, we look forward to welcoming them home. So that was our approach. But in addition to that, those that did decide to stay, the connection and the classroom that we were able to provide was really paramount in making sure that even those students that came, there was still the opportunity for them to decide to go home even though they've moved in, but being able to really have a virtual classroom right here on campus. So even if you don't make that connection, that there are still opportunities within the residence halls, was really a way that we were able to maybe save some of the melt that was already taking place.
Fantastic. So Chris, on your end, talking about how you mentioned marketing and how to ensure that you got those students back. What role did the residence halls amenities play in that? How did you tout, fantastic internet access and, learning spaces that you had set up and all of that? How did you do specific marketing around that, or did you play up those things in your virtual orientation?
We absolutely did. We are lucky to have a fantastic marketing team here at Kennesaw State that we get to work with. And we sat down and brainstormed, we have the in-class modality, we have the online modality. Let's have a marketing plan for each of those scenarios so that we can roll it out when the time comes. And we sat down and just said, okay, it costs a lot of money to live on campus. It is an investment in the student's future. At Kennesaw, you have the housing cost, and you also have a mandatory meal plan, which adds, it's like an $11,000, $12,000 investment for the total year. So we looked at what are the top 10 reasons a student should live on campus if all of their classes are online. And, we landed on, yes, the amenities for sure. We have incredible internet. We have a lot of students who, when we sent students home last March, they appealed to stay because they didn't have access to that at their home environment, and they wanted to stay on campus, and we were able to offer that to them. So when it came time to figure out what our marketing plan was going to be, that was one of the biggest components. Was we have internet access guaranteed, 100 megabits download, 20 megabits upload, guaranteed. You can't really beat that, especially in an on-campus environment. Along with the privacy, most students at Kennesaw have a private bedroom, and then a large majority have a private bedroom and bathroom. And so they were able to ease their fears of having shared spaces and sharing, in a pandemic environment, they were going to be safe and secure in their own little space. And on top of the convenience and having close access to all of the on-campus resources, which are still there even in an online environment, I think we eased a lot of parents' fears when we showed them, here's our counseling center, here's our WellStar Health Services. Everything is at your students' fingertips in the event that they do start feeling bad. If they need to isolate or quarantine, we have a plan in place to support them in that effort on campus and keep your family safe as well. That was when we were talking with parents this summer, that was a big concern for them, which is if I send my student back and they get sick, how are you going to take care of them? Because I can't bring them back home because of, X number of issues in the home environment. So we really touted that if you send your student here, we're going to take care of them from start to finish. And we've got them. We're going to keep them safe.
That's fantastic. Yeah, when we were prepping for this, we talked about how each of you have had to become public health officers, social workers, in addition to, and probably like mental health providers as well, in addition to the roles that you already play. And so taking all of that on, and I definitely want to come back to that in a minute, but let's shift gears just a little bit. And John, I want to ask you, because I think we're still in for probably a few more years of belt tightening because of the impact all of this has had. And so philosophically and practically, how did you and your team figure out, okay, here's what we're going to stop doing, and here's what we're going to invest in, both our time and money. We're going to let go of these things over here. We're going to start investing in these over here. How did you make those decisions, and what are some examples of things that you decided to stop doing to reinvest in other areas?
Yeah, sure. So some of the decisions were pretty easy. In a pandemic, you can't have big pizza parties. So our program spending changed drastically. We were looking at more of those sort of renewable, or not renewable, but reusable resources like the card games, like Iyisha was talking about earlier, that can be done more on the small scale. Some of our conversations are still ongoing about what we're keeping, what we're not keeping, but a lot of our focus was on reimagining the ways that we do things that utilize what the university already owned or had access to. So rather than spending a lot of money on supplies for our bulletin boards and things like that, what we did this year is transition to a virtual community on Canvas, which we were able to make a Canvas page for each RA. That RA is set up as a teacher in there. They make a landing page for their communities. They can send out announcements. They can do little quizzes, little community feedback pieces. And we've seen that be more successful with our first years because they don't know any better. Our upperclassmen kind of had that pushback of, well, this isn't how we've done it before, so it must not be right. But even with them, we're seeing that they're responding well to the announcements piece, at least, to where they're, able to get that and have that message there to see later on. Some of the other things we're doing, involve, unfortunately, we're down a couple positions, so that's been a bit of a cost saving. That's not a long term, hopefully. We're all hoping we can get those positions rehired soon. But we're looking at the ways that we market. We've cut down on some of our posters that have been printed there because they kind of just blend into the background noise. But we've done a lot more with our digital marketing there, or partnering with campus partners to jump into meetings that they're having with their students, be part of the events that they're featuring so we can get our names out there. There's been a lot more cross collaboration in the pandemic. I'll say that for sure. That's been a big boon for us.
Fantastic. Iyisha, what about on your end? Where have you optimized? And I'm also curious how, what strategic role has housing played in overall discussions about the strategic direction and strategic planning moving forward?
So we had some of the same ideas that John and had, and one of those big ones again was staffing. It's always a major part of your budget, and so we did not want to not fill the positions, but we saw an opportunity to fill some of our professional positions with graduate student positions and undergraduate student staff, because there was a greater need of knowing our student population. Their backgrounds, they needed those scholarship dollars, they needed that free room. And so giving those opportunities helped us in two ways. We had a warm body. So, while they did not have the experience as a professional staff that we intended to hire, there were opportunities for them to really gain some knowledge about the roles that we had open, and also to get those scholarship dollars to help them remain in school. I think holistically, the university definitely looked at housing as one of the major departments that was impacted because we had the major melt. And so I think our resourcefulness and ability to still engage students was very helpful. And also that was the core of who we have on campus to support. And so students that would normally just kind of be on campus and hanging out in different places weren't there. So if there was an opportunity to support in person, that was housing students. And I think university administration took advantage of those opportunities and strengthened our food pantry and things like that to ensure that our housing students had the resources they needed.
Fantastic. I love how you brought students in to fill some of those gaps, because that's a win-win. You get a gap filled in, they get experience and somewhat of a paycheck, right? So fantastic. These are really wonderful ideas, everybody. Chris, how about you? I know that you were pretty involved at the highest levels, on committees and in groups that were looking at strategic planning. And what are some areas where you said, okay, here's where we need to find more predictability. Here's what we can stop doing to get that predictability and to reinvest in areas. Where do you think you guys are going to be focused more in the future now as we start to see our way through this pandemic to the other side?
Yeah, absolutely. We are a big school. We have 39,000 enrolled at Kennesaw, 5,200 on campus, but we're actually a pretty small department. So there's only 4 people on the senior leadership team. So it's been a great professional experience to be involved in these types of discussions. The first thing we took a look at, budgets are tight. We're at 84% occupancy right now for spring semester. We've had lost a couple more percentage points from fall to spring. So we're looking at everything, our profit and loss statements. We're looking at our revenue compared to expenses. We were lucky that as occupancy trended down, so did our variable expenses, such as our utilities and things that we have to pay. But we had a lot of discussions, and we said, we're feeling that pinch, we're feeling that belt being tightened, but we don't want our students to feel that at all. So their number one priority, we're not cutting anything that might involve or support students in their on-campus experience. So from there, we looked at where else are we spending money? We're not going to cut our preventative maintenance projects or costs that we have, because we need to still prevent maintenance issues from happening. How can we prevent remediation issues when we have a water intrusion or something like that? Where it really came down to it was capital planning and seeing what projects we have in the pipeline and the long-term projects 5 and 7 years out that were on the books to be done. How can we trim the fat on those projects? Maybe do them on a smaller scale or spread them out into smaller chunks over time, and see if we can make that work from a budget perspective. We have a 5-year business plan that we renew and refresh every year. And so we can see our projected expenses 5 years out and are already starting to trim and tweak those based on a much lower occupancy rate. So we used to use a 95% occupancy rate as our projection. So now we're doing different models of what does it look like with 80% occupancy or 70%? Where are we going to trim the fat? And we also have a large vacancy loss. We're down 8 resident directors and 1 area coordinator on the res life side, which has saved us about $350,000, but we need people to do that work. So we're building that back into the plan in the event that the hiring freeze is lifted. And again, for us, that is student support. Those staff members are directly related to supporting students. That's not something we want to cut. So it's really taking a deep dive into all of your numbers and looking at it with a different lens and trying to figure out what is most important to us.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you, Chris. One of the things that this panel has in common is that as Apogee customers, their residence hall networks were modernized, and they have that financial predictability built in, and they haven't had to worry about that. That's on Apogee. So one of the things that I love about how we help our customers is that you guys were able to really not have to worry about that. Are there other areas that you're looking to modernize that could benefit from an outsourced partner like Apogee, or is this a unique area? And Iyisha, I'll start with you.
So we have been looking at opportunities to modernize. I think that's kind of the name of our game right now. How do we not even stay ahead, but stay close enough to remain relevant for students. Definitely every element of connection has been helpful. So there have been opportunities for us to just really think about ways to be contactless. And then on the opposite side of that, there have been a lot of ways that we've been trying to think about how do we get contact in a safe way. Some of the vendors that we work with that do our maintenance and cleaning and things like that on campus, we've kind of changed our conversation a bit to just really think about the future and how we provide resources and services to students, but in a safe way. And so those partnerships have really gained momentum or really gone to another level because we have a common goal. We're wanting to make sure that the things we invest in really matter and really have life expectancy. So those partnerships have really helped us to remain providing services at a very high level.
Fantastic. Thank you, Iyisha. And John, for you, I want to ask, what are some things, let's go to the typical, it's a little bit of a cliche, but what do you want to stop doing? And what do you want to stop doing? And what do you want to start doing coming out of the pandemic? Let's imagine a future where we're all vaccinated and it does become like the flu, where it's an acceptable level of risk, right? So let's pretend we're that happens by fall 20. Wait, what are we at? I've lost total sense of time, guys. Fall 2021. That we're there. What do you take from the pandemic and keep, and what do you just say, good riddance, I don't have to do that anymore?
Sure. I think that one of the things that we definitely want to keep are those digital community pages. I want to get to the place where we're doing more in-person engagement and where there's more a little bit of the mix of the traditional sort of like, oh, here's this bulletin board with your resources. But we found those digital communities have really been, vital in providing spaces for people to engage who may not be as comfortable in person. Even without a pandemic, you're always going to have those students who may not feel as comfortable engaging face-to-face in larger groups or even small groups sometimes. So it provides them that outlet. The kind of downside to that is that, everybody's braver behind a keyboard, so you have some people coming out of pocket a little bit more often. But our staff deal with that pretty well. Hopefully it's not the staff who are coming out of pocket, but fingers crossed we haven't had to deal with that one yet. But yeah, that's the biggest thing to move forward with, I think, and continuing to include these spaces that provide the blended learning. One thing that I definitely want to stop doing and continue stopping doing is having the sort of focus that, success comes from just numbers. I think from like our level and our standpoint, like seeing the numbers definitely looks at success, but the outside perception from other departments or the perception of our student staff and our entry-level staff that we have to have big numbers as something to be successful is something that's been radically changed in the pandemic and something that I'd like to keep that way.
That's very cool. I want to touch on that a little bit more with you, because that's almost like it's almost like taking a CX, a customer experience approach, right? Of what are the subjective measures, and this is a great segue into my next question. The subjective measures of success, not just occupancy rates or revenue or profit and loss statements, but what subjective measures are you looking at now?
So a lot of what we're looking at are some of just the individual connections that have been made. So we have our RAs track. We call them Eagle chats. So, Eagles, owls. But our individual interactions there, what they talk about a little bit. It's been interesting to see in the pandemic that those conversations have seemed to be a lot more honest. There's a lot less of the surface level. Hi, how are you doing? Okay, you still look okay. I'm going to mark you down as okay. And people are wanting to engage more of the like, tell me how you're actually doing, because I've been struggling, so I imagine you have too. So being able to, you're never going to fully track that, like you want to, or at least I haven't found a way to do it. But having a measure to track which conversations you're having and with whom has been great. And then on a slightly larger scale, we've been keeping track of the connections we're seeing between the communities, like within a building. So with the different floors, things like that. We have RAs collaborating in ways they haven't before to kind of track, not just like a floor sociogram, but like a building-wide sociogram almost. That's kind of the best way to describe it.
Very cool. Thank you. All right, Chris, how about you? What do you want to keep doing? What do you want to stop doing? And as we look out to the future and hopefully this is all under control and we're all healthy and vaccinated.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, we're talking about blending learning and a hybrid environment for students from a class perspective, but from a programmatic standpoint, I think we will always continue having a virtual component to our programming model. Now, I mentioned that we have two campuses, the Marietta and the Kennesaw. The Marietta campus is very STEM heavy. It's science, technology, engineering. Our architecture majors are down there, and the Kennesaw campus is primary liberal arts. So one of the most interesting things we've seen is that the Marietta students, who tend to be more introverted and academically focused, we would have to pull them out of their rooms to get them to come to an in-person program. But now that there is the option to do it online and they don't have to leave their room and they can still interact and meet people, they're thriving. And they're attending programs like numbers we've never seen. And we don't use program attendance as a measure of success, but it is a really interesting thing that we've noticed. And I think we will continue having that in our model of offering both in-person and virtual programs, because I think we have RAs that like that as well. They don't necessarily have to put in the time and energy with an in-person program to have their hearts broken when no one shows up. To put together a Zoom program, it's a lot easier and it's a lot less time intensive for them. So I think we'll keep that for sure. I think we will always have the option to have staff work from home. We've seen some benefits and downfalls to that. Our staff who maybe have a longer commute, they're getting to work right on time. They're joining meetings, and we've been noticing that our meetings are much more efficient in an online format. But the downside to that is that we're lacking the personal connection with each other that we used to get, face to face, talking at the water cooler, those types of things. I think one of the things I would love to stop doing is measuring our success based on just straight numbers. And that's difficult because my supervisors do measure our success based on our occupancy rates. But we're also tracking, the GPAs of the students that are living with us. Are we still providing a great experience, and are we helping retain them at Kennesaw State and progress through the different levels of classes here at Kennesaw? That is our true measure of success, not necessarily how many students we have living with us, but are we keeping them, and are we serving them well?
I love that. It's one of the interesting things that we have found as we survey our clients at Apogee. We have found that they stand above average because we serve mostly schools that have large residence hall networks, right? And so we have found that they outperform on student retention than other schools, like by 60%. In our own surveys. So that's incredible. We know that the on-campus living experience does contribute to those really important measures that go beyond profit and loss statements. So fantastic. Okay, guys, we've got about 5 minutes. So I want to have each of you, and we'll start with Iyisha. What is your top learning over the last year and advice that you would impart to the audience today?
So I would say, number one, burnout. Oh my gosh. So the COVID fatigue, it is real. I've spoken with my teams, our student staff, our professional staff, our administrative staff. And I know personally, just, from challenges that we're all facing, just kind of getting things in perspective has been a really big deal. And so housing is an awesome place to work because I have never worked in a housing environment that has not felt like family. And so we have taken care of our family. And I think that's the thing that I would definitely leave anyone with, is to continue to take care of your families, your work environment and your home family, and taking care of ourselves, having that balance, because all of the things that we do in our work environment, they start with a whole person being able to provide that support, and taking care of ourselves and taking care of our teams. Absolutely take care of our students. So I think taking burnout real, taking balance real, and just making sure that we're taking care of ourselves is the advice I have for our housing families.
Absolutely. And Iyisha, you had inspired me to write a blog post about this. So if you guys head to apogee.us and go to our insights section, I wrote a blog about how the burnout is real. You guys aren't alone, and some great resources in that blog post if you want to, and just some empathy because we're all feeling it. John, how about you? What piece of advice do you have for the audience today?
Sure. I think aside from all that Iyisha said, my biggest piece would be that now more than ever, our success is dependent on hearing what our students are saying. In this new environment where they're engaging differently, where they're facing different challenges, it's been vital for us to be able to get their direct feedback and find out what is and what isn't working so we can quickly adapt. Because, right now, being quick is what could mean the difference between retention and not. So, yeah, I think that's my biggest advice.
Thank you, John. Okay, Chris, what's your big piece of advice?
I'm going to echo something John said earlier about collaboration. I think breaking down the silos that exist on campus is critical to the collective university being successful. When everything first started going down, I saw everybody circle the wagons around their specific teams and just say, how can we get through this? And they were using the we as their specific department or functional area, but we gotta think about the collective we as a university, and share funds, share resources, share staffing, and try to break down those silos and just start working together more.
That is a wonderful note to end our session on, especially since we have been invited here by SEAHO, and I encourage all of you to lean on each other. These organizations, these regional organizations throughout the country, SEAHO, SWACUHO, NWACUHO, you guys are amazing. And the way you're supporting each other and sharing best practices and sharing wins and losses, this is the way we do it. This is the way higher ed really gets through this and comes out stronger on the other side. So I really want to thank SEAHO for having us and for giving us this opportunity to talk about how the dorm room is a new classroom and how we foresee that continuing in the future. And if anybody has any questions, feel free to reach out to me. I'm going to put my email in the chat real quick. It's tdeonis@apogee.us. And oops, I think I sent it to, let me send it to everybody. And I think everybody has members' contact information, so you should be able to easily find Iyisha, John, and Chris for questions. So everybody, thank you so much. This was a real pleasure, and we look forward to doing more of these events with you, and we're here to help. Apogee, this is all we do is higher ed. We love you guys, and we're here to help.
Thank you, guys.